Hi everyone, in this lesson we're going to start looking at trigonometry and the basics of trigonometry starting from the very beginning. So at the very beginning what you need to know is mainly stuff to do with labelling the sides and choosing the function. So make sure we've got these key points written down. So firstly we'll talk through them. So trigonometry is something that helps us to find missing sides and angles in right angle triangles, only right angle triangles. It will only work with these. You need to know how to label the sides and to choose the correct function. Now, it will be a good idea for you to do a quick sketch of a right angle triangle and write down the different sides and what they are. So the hypotenuse is the longest side on the triangle, and that's opposite diagonally the right angle. So on this triangle here, this is the hypotenuse. I'm just going to put H. Now the adjacent, that means it's the side adjacent to, which means next to both angles. If we look on this triangle, the side that's next to both angles is this one here, because you've got the right angle and you've got the labelled angle, so that must be the adjacent, so we'll call that A. And obviously the opposite is just the other one, but the opposite is opposite the angle given, not the right angle, because that's the hypotenuse, but the angle given. So this is the opposite. So you need to know how to label the sides of all the right angle triangles. Now, the reason that you need to know how to label them is because that's what tells you which function you're going to use. So to remember that, we use SOHCAHTOA, and this is how you say it, SOHCAHTOA. Now, the reason I've written it like this is because it's then useful to tell you what's at the top of the fraction and what's at the bottom of the fraction and what the function is. So if we looked at sine, you know it's sine if you have in your question the opposite and the hypotenuse, so O and H. So we can see sine, O and H. If you are given a question and you've got the adjacent and the hypotenuse, A and H, you use cos. And if you get the opposite and the adjacent, you use tan. Now you always write it in this format where it goes function, angle equals fraction. Function, angle equals fraction, okay? Now make sure you've got all that written down, because if you don't know these things, then you're going to struggle to use this to find the missing angles and sides. So we're going to start by just practicing that then. We're going to start by practicing labelling the sides and choosing the correct function. And we're just going to look at a couple of questions together, and then you should pause the video and try a couple on your own. So if we looked at these three triangles here, all I want us to do is to label the sides and choose the function. Now imagine if the question gave us this as 12 centimetres and we were looking for this line here, then what we'd have to do first is just label the two sides that you've got. Ignore the side that's blank. So this side here, I'm not interested in it. I'm not going to label it. And that makes it easier when it comes to choosing the function. So if we look at 12, we can see that that's the longest side of the triangle, diagonally opposite the right angle, so that must be the hypotenuse, H, okay? And the X centimetre side, that is next to the right angle, next to 50 degrees, so this must be the adjacent, A. So as we can see, we've got A and H. Now going back to SOHCAHTOA, which one's got A and H? Cos does, Ka, okay? So that means that we'll be using cos. So all I want you to do is write down the label of the sides and the function. The next one, imagine we know that this is 7 centimetres and we're looking for this side. Now 7 centimetres, you can see it's next to both angles, so that must be the adjacent A. And X is diagonally opposite the given angle, and it's not the longest side, so it must be O. Going back to SOHCAHTOA, what uses O and A? It's tan, so we just put tan. And for the last one, let's imagine we know that this is X and this is 9. We need to label the sides, so we know that X is the hypotenuse, it's the longest side, diagonally opposite the right angle, so that's H. And 9 is the opposite, because we can see that it's diagonally opposite the angle here. So that's O. So if we've got O and H, go back to SOHCAHTOA, oh look, it must be sine. So our function that we'll be using is sine, okay? So what I'd like you to do is to have a look at these triangles, sketch them yourselves, and label the sides and choose the function, okay? So I'm just going to add the information that you need to be able to answer this. So if you go ahead, pause video, sketch these triangles, label the sides, choose the function, and then see if you're correct. So on this first triangle, 12 is the hypotenuse, x is the adjacent, so we're using cos. On this triangle, x is the hypotenuse, 11 is the opposite, so we're using sine. And on the last one, we've got x is the adjacent, 9 is the opposite, O and A, we're using tan. So make sure that you've labelled those correctly and chosen the correct function. Okay, now we're going to move on to looking how you actually apply this to questions where you need to find the missing sides, okay? So we're going to look at that now. So a couple more key points that you need to know and have written down. So once you've labelled the sides that you need, you choose the function and write it like this. So like I said before, you always write it in this format. Write this down and always go back to this and check, have you written it in this format? Function, angle, equals, and then either O over A or O over H or whatever you've got. Now, one of the elements will be unknown, obviously, so it was going to be an X or something that you're looking for. And then what we need to do at the end of that is to rearrange the equation to find it. Now, you'll see what I mean in a sec when we start looking at these worked examples. So we're going to look at 4 together, and then I'm going to give you 2 to try on your own, and then you can move on to the worksheet. So we're going to look at these together. So let's look at this first one. The first thing we need to do is label the sides. Okay, so step 1, label sides. 12 is the hypotenuse, x is the adjacent. So going back to SOHCAHTOA, make sure you always write it down if you haven't written it down. Going back to SOHCAHTOA, we can see if we've got A and H, that means we must be using cos. So I write down cos, and then I write down the angle, which is 53, that's it here. And then I write equals, and then I write my fraction. Now looking at SOHCAHTOA, I can see that the adjacent goes at the top. The adjacent is x, so x over 12, which is the hypotenuse. Now that is where you get your first mark, and as you can see, the question is worth 2 marks in total. And writing this down, this stage of working out would give you 1 mark. Now, think about it. We need to work out what x is. So we're going to solve this like a normal equation. So if I was looking for x and I need to make it on its own, I need to get rid of this divide by 12. Don't forget, the fraction means divide by 12. So if I'm going to do the inverse of division, I'm going to have to times this by 12. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write down cos 53, make sure you're closing your brackets, times 12. And that gets rid of this on this side, and then we have x on its own. And then all you do is type that into a calculator. Now the question asks us to round it to 1 decimal place, and this answer rounded to 1 decimal place is 7.2. Okay, and that's your answer. That's your 2 marks. Going on to the next question, we need to find the length of AB. So sometimes they don't tell you where X is, the side that you're looking for. You have to think about it. So length AB, that means the line that is A to B. So I'm going to call this X because this is what I'm looking for. Okay, so step 1, again, is to label our sides. So X here is the opposite and 8 is the adjacent. We're not interested in the hypotenuse, so I don't label it. So if I've got O and A, using SOHCAHTOA, I know that must be tan. So you write down tan of the angle, 65, close brackets, equals, and we know because of SOHCAHTOA, O goes at the top of the fraction, so that's X, and A goes at the bottom, that's 8. Now, once again, to get X on its own, we need to do the inverse of divided by 8. So we have to do times 8. So we're going to do tan 65 times 8, and that will give us X. Again, we're asked to round it to 1 decimal place, and we get 17.2. And that is your answer for that one. On to the next one then. We are looking for the value of X, and we've got this line here. So first of all, we need to label the sides. X is the hypotenuse, and 10 is the adjacent. Not interested in O. So we've got A and H, so we know we need to use cos, okay? Because SOHCAHTOA. So cos 49 equals the adjacent 10 over X. Now this time you'll notice it's slightly different because the X is at the bottom of the fraction. Okay, now when this happens, when X is at the bottom of the fraction, we need to swap these two round. Okay, and the reason we can do that is because if we bring X to this side, it becomes X times cos 49 equals 10, And then if we want x on its own, we then have to divide by cos 49 on this side. So you get x equals 10 divided by cos 49. But as a quick step, we can just swap these two round. Now you type this into the calculator, and we'd asked to round it to 2 decimal places this time, and this will give us 15.24. And that is your final answer. Okay, this one here. So we're finding the length of PQ. Again, we need to write down x on our own. So PQ is this line here, so I'm going to call that x. And then we need to label our sides. So I've got PQ is x, that's the hypotenuse, and QR is the opposite. So O and H, we're using sine. So you write down sine of the angle equals opposite over hypotenuse, so 7 over x. Once again, the x is at the bottom, and when the x is at the bottom, we switch these two round. And we get x equals 7 over sine 29. We type it into a calculator, round it to 2 decimal places, and we get 14.44. So those examples, it's worth having those written down. Make sure that you understand them. Make sure that you've got all the working out written and that you understand all the steps. And then I'd like you to move on and have a go at these 2 questions on your own. So pause the video, sketch the triangles, label the sides, have a go, and then come back to see if you're right. Okay, so this first question then, we need to label the sides first. So x is the hypotenuse, 6 is the opposite. That means we're using sine of the angle 41 equals 6 over x. X at the bottom, so we switch these round, and we get x equals 6 divided by sine 41. That's your working out. Type it into a calculator, round it to 1 dp, and you get 9.1. Okay, next question. We need to find the length of MN. So MN is going to be x. That is the hypotenuse. 6.5 is the adjacent. So I'm using cos of the angle 70 equals 6.5 over x. Again, x at the bottom, I switch them round, and you get x equals 6.5 divided by cos 70. Type that into a calculator, round it to 2 decimal places this time, and you get 19.00. So make sure you've got both of those correct. And you can now move on to the worksheet and then do the exit card.